The hum of the air conditioning was a constant in the 23rd floor offices of the international audit firm in Cebu's business district. From her desk by the window, Sandra Reyes often stole moments to look out at the skyline, the old Spanish churches mingling with glass towers, the sea stretching out beyond. For her, the city was a place of both ambition and solitude. At 29, Sandra had built a reputation as a diligent associate in the compliance department. Quiet, graceful, with long dark hair that framed her delicate face, she was admired but not flamboyant. She never sought attention. Instead, she let her work and her kindness speak for her. Still, people noticed her, especially Miguel Torres. Miguel worked in risk and assurance, 2 floors above, but somehow their paths crossed often, at weekly staff meetings, at training sessions, or at the elevator where his presence seemed to fill the space. At 35, he was polished yet approachable, with the kind of confidence that came not only from professional success, but also from a privileged upbringing. His father owned several businesses in Manila. His mother was a philanthropist, and Miguel himself had spent years abroad before choosing to return to the Philippines. Everyone in the office knew he had a long-term girlfriend, Amy, who lived in Sedona, Arizona. She was elegant, accomplished, and from a family as wealthy as his. Their photographs graced his social media, a striking couple framed by desert landscapes, vineyards, or art galleries. To Sandra, they seemed a world apart, untouchable. And yet, on Friday nights, Miguel was simply Miguel, part of their little group of 5. Along with Merlina from tax, John from IT, and Peter from internal audit, they had built a ritual of unwinding at cafes, seaside restaurants, or sometimes in one another's homes. It was laughter after long hours, the comfort of shared food, and the rare relief of friendship in a demanding industry. Sandra treasured those nights more than she admitted. They were moments when Miguel's laugh was unguarded, when his serious face softened, when he teased her about her fondness for Halo Halo, or when he praised her sharp insights into the firm's clients. She told herself she valued the friendship, nothing more. And yet, a secret part of her heart beat a little faster when his gaze lingered a moment longer than necessary. When Miguel bought a condominium in the same building where Sandra rented, it felt like a coincidence too uncanny to ignore. The others teased them both. "Now you can carpool to the elevator," Merlina laughed one night, but Sandra brushed it aside. Miguel was spoken for, and she was too sensible to fall into an impossible dream. Still, the stage was being set. Life, as Sandra was about to learn, had a way of rewriting even the most carefully guarded rules of the heart. Chapter 1. The Stormy Night. The rain had begun in the late afternoon, a steady drizzle that turned into sheets of water by early evening. Cebu was no stranger to tropical downpours, but tonight, the storm seemed determined to drown the city. Traffic slowed to a crawl, horns blared in frustration, and the usual hum of Friday night excitement was dampened by the heavy weather. Inside his new condominium, Miguel Torres moved about with restless energy. Even though it is Thursday, he had invited their usual group, Merlina, John, Peter, and Sandra, for dinner at his place. It had been his idea to celebrate his move into the condo, and he had insisted on cooking spaghetti himself, though the truth was, he wasn't entirely confident in his culinary skills. A knock at the door broke his thoughts. He opened it to find Sandra standing there, her umbrella dripping, her cheeks flushed from the rain. She wore a simple white blouse with off-shoulder puff sleeves paired with a modest blue skirt. The dampness in the air clung to her blouse, highlighting the graceful curve of her shoulders, the soft femininity she carried so naturally. "You're early," Miguel said with a smile, stepping aside to let her in. "I came straight from the office. I thought I'd beat the traffic," she replied, shaking droplets from her umbrella. Turns out, everyone else had the same idea. It's terrible out there. Miguel laughed lightly, leading her inside. "You're the first to arrive. Actually, you might be the only one if this storm keeps up." Sandra's eyes took in his condo, The modern furnishings, the sleek lines softened by warm lighting. It was comfortable yet masculine, much like its owner. On the counter lay ingredients for spaghetti: ground beef, tomatoes, garlic, pasta still in its packaging. "Need help?" she asked, slipping easily into his space as though she belonged there. He hesitated only a second before nodding. "Absolutely. I was about to murder this sauce." Sandra tied her hair into a loose bun and moved to the kitchen. She reached for a pan, poured in olive oil, and began to sauté garlic. Miguel leaned against the counter, watching her with a quiet fascination. There was something disarming about the way she stirred with ease, her sleeves falling back to reveal the smooth line of her arms. "You've done this before," Miguel said, stepping closer. "Unlike you, I don't rely on restaurants all the time," she teased. He chuckled, then leaned over, so close she felt his breath near her temple. He dipped a spoon into the simmering sauce and brought it to his lips. "Not bad," he murmured, his face inches from hers. Sandra froze, aware of his nearness, the warmth of his body radiating against her. Her heart fluttered wildly, her fingers tightening around the wooden spoon. She forced a small laugh. "Don't distract the cook." Before Miguel could reply, his phone buzzed. He picked it up, listening intently. A few moments later, he sighed and ended the call. "That was Peter. They're stuck in traffic. Apparently there's a K-pop concert near the IT park, and the whole area's gridlocked." As if on cue, another message came through from Merlina. Then John. All three had canceled. "So," Sandra began, her voice soft, "it's just us?" Miguel's lips curved into a faint smile. "Looks like it." Dinner was surprisingly delicious, though Sandra teased him for overcooking the pasta slightly. Afterward, they carried their plates to the sink, washing them together like an old married couple. The storm outside grew fiercer, thunder rolling across the city. But inside the condo was warm, safe, almost intimate. They settled on the couch, a movie playing softly on the television. Sandra sat close enough to feel the heat of his arm beside hers, though she kept her hands folded neatly on her lap. She told herself it was nothing, just two friends waiting out the storm. But her pulse betrayed her. Miguel shifted, turning slightly toward her. His gaze lingered on her lips, then back to her eyes. Sandra's breath caught. He leaned in, slow and deliberate, as though giving her a chance to pull away. She didn't. Her eyes fluttered shut, and then his lips brushed hers, warm, soft, tentative at first, then deepening, with a hunger that startled them both. When he finally pulled back, Miguel whispered, "Sandra," as if saying her name explained everything he couldn't. Sandra opened her eyes, heart racing, knowing that nothing between them would ever be the same again. Chapter 2. The Afterglow of Secnets. The storm had passed by dawn, leaving the streets of Cebu washed clean, the air tinged with the scent of wet asphalt and seawater drifting in from the harbor. But inside Sandra, the storm had not passed at all. She sat at her desk the next morning, fingers poised over her keyboard, her mind miles away from the report she was supposed to finish. Instead, she replayed the moment again and again, Miguel's face leaning close, the heat of his breath, the taste of his kiss. Her cheeks flushed, and she quickly lowered her head as a colleague passed by. To anyone else, she was the same Sandra, calm, professional, quietly focused. But inside, her heart trembled with the memory. How could she have let it happen? Miguel had a girlfriend. He wasn't hers. And yet, in that fleeting moment, he had kissed her as though nothing else in the world mattered. The ding of the elevator made her spine stiffen. She knew it before she looked up. Miguel. He stepped out, wearing a navy suit, crisp white shirt, no tie, his dark hair neatly combed. He carried himself with effortless confidence, but Sandra noticed the flicker of hesitation when his gaze met hers across the open office. For one heartbeat, the world shrank to just the two of them. Then he gave a polite nod, the same one he might give any colleague, and walked past to the meeting rooms. Sandra exhaled, her pulse racing. So that was how it would be. They would pretend. Pretend nothing happened. Pretend they were still just colleagues, friends, Friday night companions. But pretense was easier said than done. Later that afternoon, during a cross-departmental meeting, Sandra sat at one end of the long conference table, while Miguel sat near the center. His voice carried easily as he presented audit findings, steady and authoritative. Sandra tried to focus on the slides, but her eyes betrayed her, stealing glances at the man whose lips had claimed hers only hours ago. When their eyes met, just for a second, her breath caught. He looked away quickly, clearing his throat, but she saw it. The spark. He felt it too. After the meeting, as people filtered out, Sandra gathered her papers slowly. Miguel lingered near the door, speaking to another manager, but his eyes darted toward her once, then twice. Finally, when the room had emptied, he approached. About last night. His voice was low, careful. Sandra clutched her folder, her fingers tight around the edges. It was the storm, she said quickly, forcing a small smile. The wine, the atmosphere, it just happened. Miguel studied her, his dark eyes unreadable. Is that what you believe? She hesitated, then nodded. It's better that way, for a moment. She thought he would argue. Instead, he exhaled softly, as though conceding to a battle neither of them could win. All right, but just so you know, I don't regret it. Her heart leapt, but she forced herself to remain composed. She offered only a brief nod before walking away, heels clicking across the polished floor, each step carrying the weight of unspoken words. That night, Sandra lay awake in her small condo unit, 2 floors below Miguel's. The hum of the city outside could not drown out the memory of his kiss, nor the way he had said he didn't regret it. She pressed a hand to her chest, whispering into the silence, "Neither do I." Chapter 3. Unraveling Boundaries. Friday came again, as it always did. Normally, Sandra looked forward to their group's weekly ritual. But ever since that night at Miguel's condo, each gathering carried a weight of anticipation that she struggled to hide. This week, they met at a quiet seaside cafe overlooking the water. The storm of the past weekend was gone, leaving behind clear skies, a brilliant moon shimmering across the dark waves. Their group occupied a table near the railing, laughter and chatter floating above the clink of cutlery and the soft strumming of a guitar from a busker nearby. Sandra sat between Merlina and Peter, but her awareness of Miguel was constant. He sat across the table, smiling, telling a story about a client in Manila, his hand occasionally brushing his glass, his gaze, more often than it should, finding hers. She tried to laugh at John's jokes, to join Merlina's teasing, but every time her eyes strayed toward Miguel, she felt a jolt of something dangerous and sweet. Later, after the group dispersed, Sandra walked home with Miguel, as they often did since living in the same building. The night air was warm, carrying the salt of the sea and the faint scent of grilled street food. "It's nice tonight," Sandra said, hugging her small bag against her side. "Yeah," Miguel replied, his hands in his pockets. Quiet, peaceful. They fell into step, their shoulders brushing lightly. Each contact sent a ripple through her, and though she told herself to step away, she couldn't. She didn't want to. In the lobby, they paused. Usually, this was where they said goodnight. But Miguel hesitated. "Coffee?" he asked, just to wind down. Sandra's heart raced. She should say no. She should protect herself. Instead, she nodded. In his condo, the city lights glittered through the wide glass windows, casting a soft glow across the living room. Sandra perched on the couch while Miguel made coffee. When he returned, handing her a steaming mug, she smiled her thanks. They talked about work first, then about their colleagues, but slowly, the conversation turned personal. Sandra spoke of her childhood in the province, how she had dreamed of working in the city, how lonely it sometimes felt to succeed, yet have no one to share it with. Miguel listened intently, his expression softer than she had ever seen. "You're not alone, Sandra," he said quietly. "You're stronger than you know. But I see you. I've always seen you." The words undid her. She blinked back sudden tears, embarrassed. "I'm sorry. I don't usually." He reached across, brushing the back of her hand with his fingertips. "Don't apologize." The touch lingered. Neither of them moved away. Sandra's breath caught as Miguel's hand slid gently to entwine with hers. Their eyes locked, and in that silence, the boundaries they had tried to maintain crumbled. He leaned in, and she met him halfway. The kiss was different this time, no longer hesitant, but full, deep, charged with all the longing they had suppressed. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her close, and she melted into him, her body fitting perfectly against his. When they finally pulled apart, Sandra whispered, "Miguel, this isn't right." But his forehead rested against hers, his voice a low murmur. "Maybe not, but it feels like the only thing that is." Sandra closed her eyes, torn between the truth she knew and the heart she couldn't control. That night, as she walked back to her own unit, her lips still tingling from his kiss, Sandra knew their lives had just crossed a line that could never be erased. Chapter 4: Crossroads of the Heart. The weeks that followed were a blur of stolen moments. At work, Miguel and Sandra moved carefully, aware of the curious eyes of colleagues. To others, they were no different, just part of the same Friday night group, just neighbors, just coworkers. But behind the mask of normalcy, their lives had changed. They shared late-night coffees in his condo, quiet walks back from the office, brief touches that lingered too long. Miguel began sending Sandra short messages in the middle of the day, nothing obvious, but enough to remind her he was thinking of her. "How's your meeting? You looked tired earlier. Don't forget lunch. Coffee later?" Each word lit up her heart, though guilt followed quickly behind. One Saturday afternoon, they drove together to the mountains outside Cebu, under the pretense of Miguel wanting to show her a place. The winding roads led them to a hilltop overlooking the city, where the view stretched to the distant sea. They sat side by side on a stone ledge, the breeze ruffling Sandra's hair. "I used to come here in college," Miguel said, leaning back on his hands. Whenever life got too noisy, Sandra hugged her knees, gazing at the panorama. "It's beautiful. Peaceful." "You're beautiful," he said softly. She turned, startled, only to meet the warmth of his gaze. Her chest tightened, her throat thick with emotions she could no longer deny. "Miguel," he reached for her hand. "Sandra, I know what this looks like. I know it's complicated. Amy and we've been together for years, but lately," he paused, sighing. "Sometimes I wonder if we're together because it's expected, not because it's right." Sandra's heart pounded. She wanted to ask more, but fear held her tongue. Instead, she let him lace his fingers through hers, holding tightly as if neither of them wanted to let go. That evening, back at his condo, the unspoken finally broke. Miguel kissed her with a hunger that left her trembling. His hands cupped her face, his body pressed close, and Sandra felt herself surrendering. Every warning in her head screamed at her to stop, but her heart, her soul, her very being yearned for him. Later, when they lay in the quiet aftermath, Sandra rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. She traced absent patterns across his skin, her voice barely a whisper. "I shouldn't love you," she said. Miguel's hand tightened around her waist. "But you do?" Sandra closed her eyes. "I think I've been falling since the first day we met." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then his lips brushed her forehead, tender, reverent. "Sandra, you're not alone in this." Her chest ached with equal parts joy and fear. She knew what they had was fragile, built on dangerous ground. Yet in that moment, with Miguel's arms around her and his words etched into her heart, Sandra couldn't imagine walking away. She had crossed a line, and she knew there was no turning back. Chapter 5: The First Cracks. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Sandra first suspected. She had been feeling unusually tired, her mornings spent fighting a dull nausea that coffee no longer masked. At first, she dismissed it as stress, the long hours, the late nights, the emotional weight of her secret relationship with Miguel. But when her cycle failed to come, dread mingled with hope in her chest. That weekend, alone in her condo, she stared at the small white box she had bought from the pharmacy. Her hands shook as she unwrapped the test, whispering a prayer she couldn't even finish. Minutes stretched into eternity until the faint blue lines appeared, sharp and undeniable. Pregnant. Sandra sat down heavily on her bed, the test clutched in her trembling hands. Tears filled her eyes, not of regret but of fear. A part of her felt a surge of joy at the thought of carrying Miguel's child. But the rest of her heart broke with the knowledge of his life in Arizona, the girlfriend he had never left, the expectations that bound him. She pressed a hand against her flat stomach. What will I do now? That evening, Miguel called. His voice, warm and familiar, carried through the phone. Dinner? I've been thinking of you all day. Sandra swallowed hard. She wanted to tell him, wanted to share the news, to see his face light up. But something held her back. Instead, she said softly, maybe another time. I'm a little tired tonight. There was a pause on the line, then his gentle concern. Are you okay? I'm fine, she lied. Just need some rest. But rest never came. The following week, Sandra's worst fears unfolded. Amy was back. It was Merlina who first mentioned it in the office pantry, her voice casual as she poured coffee. Did you hear? Miguel's girlfriend flew in from Arizona. They were seen at Ayala yesterday. Gorgeous, that woman. Sandra forced a smile, her heart plummeting to her stomach. She nodded politely, pretending it didn't matter, but inside, the words carved her apart. That evening, she saw them with her own eyes. Stepping out of the elevator in the lobby, Sandra froze when she spotted Miguel and Amy walking hand in hand across the marble floor. Amy was radiant, her laughter echoing, her hand possessive on Miguel's arm. Miguel's eyes flicked up and caught Sandra's. For one fleeting second, something unspoken passed between them. Guilt, longing, regret. But Amy tugged at him, and he looked away. Sandra's vision blurred. She hurried past, her heels clicking too loudly, her chest burning with a pain she could not name. That night, she wept silently into her pillow, her hands pressed protectively over her belly. She had wanted to tell him about their baby. Now she couldn't. He belonged to another world, a world where Amy fit perfectly, and Sandra was nothing more than a secret. She whispered into the darkness, her tears soaking the sheets. I'll do this on my own. And in that moment, Sandra made her choice. She would not tell Miguel. She would raise their child alone, no matter how much it broke her heart. Chapter 6. A Heart Torn in Two. The office buzzed with its usual rhythm. Phones ringing, printers humming, muted conversations across glass-walled rooms. But for Sandra, everything felt muted, muffled, as though she were moving in a haze. She had become skilled at hiding the truth. The morning sickness, the exhaustion, the ache in her heart every time she passed Miguel in the corridor. She smiled when spoken to, delivered her reports on time, and laughed politely at Peter's jokes during Friday breaks. But beneath the polished surface, she was unraveling. Miguel noticed. It was in the way Sandra no longer lingered in the lobby for their late walks home, in the way she excused herself from group dinners, claiming deadlines or fatigue, in the way her eyes darted away when he caught her gaze in meetings. One afternoon, he cornered her by the copy room. Sandra, he said softly, his voice careful, are you avoiding me? Her pulse leapt, but she kept her expression composed. Of course not, I've just been busy. He studied her, his brow furrowed. You've been different since Amy came back. Sandra's chest tightened. She wanted to scream yes, to tell him that every moment she saw him with Amy felt like a blade twisting in her ribs, that she was carrying his child, that her silence was breaking her. But instead, She forced a weak smile. "That's your life, Miguel. It has nothing to do with me." His jaw tightened. "Don't say that." Before she could reply, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Amy appeared, her designer heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. She smiled when she saw Miguel, sliding her arm through his without hesitation. "There you are," Amy said warmly, though her eyes flicked to Sandra with thinly veiled curiosity. "We're late for dinner. Everyone's waiting." Sandra's throat closed. She mumbled a quick excuse and slipped away, her hands trembling as she returned to her desk. The following week, Amy organized a dinner at a high-end restaurant in IT Park, inviting several colleagues from the firm. Sandra received the invitation through Merlina, but the very thought of watching Miguel sit beside Amy, laughing, playing the role of the perfect couple, made her stomach churn. "I can't," Sandra whispered, handing the invitation back. "Tell her I have a deadline." Merlina frowned but didn't press. That evening, Sandra sat alone in her condo, staring out at the glittering lights of the city. Somewhere down there, Miguel was with Amy, surrounded by friends, perhaps smiling that easy smile Sandra loved so much. She wrapped her arms around herself, whispering, "You'll get through this, for the baby." Miguel, however, was far from at ease. At the dinner, Amy basked in the attention, charming the group with stories from Arizona, her plans for a possible wedding. Miguel smiled, nodded at the right moments, but his mind drifted elsewhere, toward a woman who hadn't shown up, whose absence was like an empty space only he could feel. When Amy reached for his hand across the table, he allowed it, but his chest ached. Because the truth he could no longer deny was simple. The person he wanted beside him wasn't Amy. It was Sandra. And every day she pulled further away, every excuse she gave, every absence, was slowly tearing him apart. Chapter 7. The breaking point. Sandra's request for transfer was typed, printed, and folded neatly inside a cream envelope. She had stared at it for days before finally gathering the courage to slide it across her manager's desk. "It's a personal matter," she explained quietly when asked. "I believe it's best for me to continue my work at another branch, Manila maybe, or Davao." Her manager, though surprised, didn't press further. "You're one of our best, Sandra. I'll approve this, but I'll hate to see you go." Sandra smiled faintly, her heart breaking as she left the office. Each step toward the elevator felt like walking away not only from her career in Cebu, but from Miguel himself. Miguel, meanwhile, was beginning to feel trapped. Amy had wasted no time in making her presence known, visiting the office with elaborate lunches, arranging dinners with his friends, and talking casually about a future that Miguel hadn't agreed to. At one such dinner, held at her family's ancestral home in Manila, Amy raised her glass. "To us," she said, her voice bright, "and to our wedding next year." The guests clapped politely, but Miguel froze, his grip tightening around his wine glass. Wedding? He hadn't proposed, hadn't even agreed to such a timeline. Yet Amy spoke as though it were a certainty. Later, when they were alone, he confronted her. "Amy, why did you say that?" "Because it's true," she replied smoothly, brushing her long hair over her shoulder. "We've been together for years, Miguel. Everyone expects it. Our families, our friends. Isn't it time we made it official?" He stared at her, realizing with a sharp pang how distant she felt, despite their history. Amy was beautiful, intelligent, accomplished, but the warmth, the tenderness, the sense of being truly seen, those things had vanished long ago. Sandra's face flickered in his mind. Her quiet strength, her gentle laughter, the way she stirred spaghetti sauce in his kitchen as if she belonged there. And for the first time, Miguel allowed himself to whisper the truth inside his heart. "I don't love Amy. I never really did, not the way I love Sandra." Back in Cebu, Sandra packed her small apartment piece by piece. Clothes folded into boxes, photo frames wrapped in newspapers. She moved slowly, carefully, as if prolonging the inevitable goodbye. She paused often, hand on her belly, whispering to the child growing within her. "It'll just be us, JR. You and me. We'll be okay. We have to be." On her last day at the office, she avoided Miguel altogether. She couldn't face him, not when she knew her resolve would crumble with a single look. She handed in her ID, smiled through goodbyes, and walked out with her heart in shards. Miguel returned from Manila 2 days later. His mind made up to end things with Amy, only to find Sandra gone. The news hit him like a blow. "Transfer?" he repeated to Merlina in disbelief. She nodded sadly. "She didn't tell you? She left already, asked to be reassigned." Miguel's chest tightened, his voice raw. She didn't say goodbye. For nights after, he stood on his balcony, staring down at the dark windows of the condo that had once held her. The silence mocked him, and regret gnawed at his soul. He had lost her, and he had only himself to blame. Sandra, meanwhile, stepped into her new life in Davao, her hand protectively over her belly as the plane descended. She kept her tears hidden, but deep down, she carried both a piece of Miguel and the ache of leaving him behind. Chapter 8. Goodbye to Amy. The Torres ancestral home in Manila had always been a place of elegance and tradition. Its marble floors, high ceilings, and crystal chandeliers echoing with the voices of generations. It was here, in the very heart of his family's legacy, that Miguel ended the chapter that had bound him for years. Amy was waiting for him in the sitting room, a glass of red wine in her hand. She looked radiant as always, dressed in a silk dress that spoke of effortless wealth. When Miguel entered, she smiled, expecting warmth, expecting loyalty. Instead, she found steel in his eyes. "Amy," Miguel began, his voice steady, "we need to talk." She tilted her head, feigning innocence. "About what? The wedding? My mother already started planning the guest list." Miguel exhaled sharply, frustration tightening his jaw. "That's just it. You're planning a life I never agreed to, a life I don't want." Amy's smile faltered. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we're over." The words fell heavy, echoing in the ornate room. "We've been living in the shadow of everyone else's expectations, our families, society. But there's no love between us anymore. There hasn't been for a long time." Amy's eyes flared, her voice rising. "No love? Miguel, we've been together for years. Our families are tied together. Our futures are aligned. You think you can just walk away? What will people say?" "I don't care what people say," Miguel shot back. "I can't keep lying, not to you and not to myself." Amy slammed her glass down, the wine splashing onto the table. "This is because of her, isn't it? That girl in Cebu, that little nobody." Miguel froze, his chest tightening, but he didn't deny it. His silence was answer enough. Amy's voice shook with fury. "You'll regret this. You'll regret throwing away a life of comfort and prestige for some fling." Miguel's gaze softened, though his resolve did not. "What I regret, Amy, is not ending this sooner. You deserve someone who truly loves you, and I deserve the same." She turned away, trembling with rage, her back rigid as marble. "Get out," she whispered. "Get out of my house." He did. Without another word, Miguel walked away from the only life he had ever known, carrying nothing but the truth in his heart, that the woman he loved was gone, and he had let her slip through his fingers. Back in Davao, Sandra settled into her new routine, her belly growing with each passing month. She threw herself into her work, keeping busy with reports and audits, pretending her evenings weren't filled with loneliness. Her colleagues admired her dedication, never guessing the weight she carried. At night, she whispered to the child within her, her secret companion. "You're my little miracle, JR. We'll make it through. Mama promises." And though she never said his name aloud, every time she closed her eyes, she saw Miguel's face. In Cebu, Miguel buried himself in work. He accepted promotion after promotion, rising quickly through the firm's ranks. His friends noticed the change. He smiled less, laughed rarely, and declined most Friday night invitations. He lived in his condo alone, the walls echoing with silence. Years passed, but no matter how many achievements he earned, how many accolades he received, one truth remained constant. He was still in love with Sandra Reyes. Chapter 9. Years apart. 5 years passed like a whisper carried on the wind. In Davao, Sandra's life became a steady rhythm of work and motherhood. Her mornings began with the bright laughter of her son, JR, short for Miguel Jr., though no one else knew the truth of his name. With his father's dark, thoughtful eyes and her gentle smile, JR was a daily reminder of the love she had lost, yet could never let go of. Sandra devoted herself to him entirely. She brought him to preschool, cheered his first hesitant steps, laughed at his endless questions. At night, when she tucked him into bed, he would curl his small fingers around hers and whisper, "Good night, Mama. I love you." Those moments sustained her through the loneliness. At the office, she earned respect for her competence and dedication. Yet colleagues noticed the faint sadness in her eyes, the way she turned down invitations for drinks or gatherings. No one pressed her. Sandra kept her private life carefully guarded. Her secret is hers alone, that the boy she loved more than life itself was also the son of the man she had walked away from. Meanwhile, in Cebu, Miguel's name became synonymous with success. By 40, he had risen to become president of the firm's Philippine division. His leadership was lauded, his financial strategies praised, and his sharp instincts admired. But behind the accolades, Miguel lived in solitude. He never married, never entertained long-term relationships again. Rumors swirled. Some said he was too focused on his career, others that his heart had been broken years ago. He ignored them all. At night, in his spacious condo overlooking the glittering city, he often poured himself a glass of scotch and sat by the window. The city lights shimmered like stars below, but they did nothing to fill the emptiness inside him. Sometimes he closed his eyes and remembered a stormy night, a bowl of spaghetti sauce, the taste of a kiss that had set his world ablaze. He remembered Sandra's laughter, her eyes when she looked at him as though she saw more than anyone else ever could. And he wondered where she was, if she was happy, if she ever thought of him too. Fate, however, was preparing to weave their paths together again. Sandra had been feeling unwell for months. At first, she dismissed it as exhaustion from juggling work and single motherhood. But when the fatigue deepened and her body betrayed her with unexplainable pain, she sought medical help. The diagnosis came like a cruel storm, a progressive cancer. Alone in her apartment, Sandra wept quietly as JR played with his toy cars at her feet. She had fought every battle life had thrown her way, but this one was different. This time, she was terrified, not for herself, but for the boy she might leave behind. That night, she sat at her desk, pen trembling in her hand as she wrote a letter. It was a desperate move, one she had avoided for years. "Miguel," she wrote, "there is something you need to know." Her tears blurred the ink. She folded the letter, sealing within it the truth she had kept hidden all these years. JR deserved his father, and Miguel Torres deserved to know he had a son. Chapter 10. The Letter. The envelope sat on Sandra's kitchen table for 2 days before she found the courage to send it. She had rewritten the words a dozen times, crumpled sheets of paper filling her trash bin. In the end, the letter was simple, honest, stripped bare of excuses. "Miguel, I've kept something from you, something I had no right to hide. I don't know how to begin, except to say I'm sorry. I was afraid of hurting you, of losing you, of facing a truth I wasn't strong enough to bear. But now I don't have the luxury of fear. You have a son. His name is JR. He's 5 years old. He deserves to know you, and you deserve to know him. I am sick, Miguel. The doctors say it's cancer, and though I am fighting, I must prepare for what may come. I have no family. JR has only me. If something happens, I want him to have you. I pray you can forgive me. I pray you will love him as much as I do." Sandra, her hands shook as she sealed the envelope. At the administration department office, she hesitated at the counter, her stomach twisting with fear. But at last, she slid the letter forward, her heart heavy with hope and dread. Miguel found the letter waiting on his desk late one evening. It had been forwarded from Davao by the firm's internal mail, the handwriting instantly familiar. His chest tightened before he even broke the seal. As he read, the blood drained from his face. His hands trembled, eyes darting over the words again and again as if they might change. A son. His son. He stood abruptly, pacing the length of his office, the weight of 5 lost years crashing down upon him. Every Friday night laugh, every tender moment, every goodbye, suddenly reframed by the knowledge that Sandra had been carrying his child when she walked away. Grief tore through him. Grief for the years he had missed, for the milestones he hadn't witnessed, for the boy who had grown up without his father. And beneath the grief, a fierce determination sparked. He would not waste another day. The next morning, Miguel was on the first flight to Davao. The city was humid, its streets bustling, but he noticed none of it. His mind was a storm, his heart pounding as he stood before the modest apartment building Sandra had listed as her return address. He knocked. The door opened, and a boy stood before him. Big, curious eyes, his eyes, stared up at him. "Hello," the boy said, tilting his head. "Who are you?" Miguel's throat tightened. His voice was hoarse when he answered, I'm a friend of your mama's. Is she here?" "Ma," the boy called, running back into the apartment. "There's a man here." A moment later, Sandra appeared. She was thinner, her face pale, a scarf tied around her head where her hair had begun to fall from chemotherapy. Her eyes widened when she saw him, her breath catching. "Miguel," she whispered. He stepped inside, his gaze locked on hers, his voice breaking. "Sandra, why didn't you tell me?" Tears welled in her eyes, spilling down her cheeks. "Because I thought you loved Amy more, because I was afraid, and because I didn't want to be your burden." Miguel closed the distance, taking her trembling hands into his own eyes burned with tears. "You could never be a burden. And Amy was never what I wanted. Don't you see? It was always you." Sandra sobbed softly, her body shaking as he pulled her into his arms. For the first time in years, she let herself lean against him, feeling the strength of the man she had loved all along. Behind them, little JR peeked curiously around the corner, watching as his mother wept in the arms of the man whose eyes mirrored his own. Miguel looked down at him, then back at Sandra. His voice was a vow. "I'll be here, for you, for him. I'm not leaving again." Chapter 11, A Father's Love. The days that followed blurred into something both fragile and profound. Miguel stayed in Davao, unwilling to leave Sandra, and the boy he had just discovered was his son. At first, JR was shy. He studied Miguel from a distance, his little brow furrowed on curiosity. But slowly, curiosity gave way to cautious trust. One afternoon, Miguel sat on the floor of Sandra's apartment, awkwardly holding a toy car. "So, how does this work?" he asked, his tone light. JR giggled, crawling closer. "You have to make the sound, Papa." Miguel froze at the word, his throat constricted, eyes stinging. "Papa?" he whispered. JR nodded, pushing the toy car across the floor. "Mama said you're my papa. I can call you that, right?" Miguel swallowed hard, his heart breaking open. He pulled JR gently into his lap, holding him close. "Yes, hijo, you can call me that. I'll always be your papa." Sandra watched from the couch, tears streaming silently down her face. In that moment, she saw not the powerful executive or the man torn by past choices, but a father, gentle, tender, and already deeply in love with his child. But the reality of Sandra's illness was never far. Her chemotherapy sessions left her exhausted, pale, and fragile. Some days she could barely rise from bed, her body racked with pain and nausea. Miguel was there through it all. He drove her to the hospital, sat beside her during treatments, held her hand when the IV was inserted. He brought her warm blankets, whispered encouragement, and when she was too weak to smile, he smiled for both of them. Late at night, when JR was asleep, Miguel sat by Sandra's bed, watching over her. Sometimes she stirred, her voice barely audible. "You shouldn't be here, Miguel. You have a life in Cebu, a career." He brushed her hair back from her damp forehead, his touch tender. "My life is here now, with you, with our son. Nothing else matters." Tears filled her eyes, but she shook her head faintly. "Don't make promises you can't keep." Miguel leaned closer, his lips brushing her hand. "This isn't a promise, Sandra. It's the truth. I lost you once. I won't lose you again." As weeks passed, JR and Miguel grew inseparable. They went to the park together, played basketball in the driveway, and Miguel read him bedtime stories in his deep, steady voice. JR began to glow with happiness, proud to tell his friends that his papa lived with him now. Sandra, watching them together, felt her heart swell with equal parts joy and sorrow. She had prayed for JR to have a father's love, and now that prayer was answered. But she feared it might be too late for her. And yet, for the first time since her diagnosis, she began to hope. One evening, after a long day, Sandra sat on the balcony, a shawl wrapped around her thin shoulders. Miguel joined her, 2 mugs of ginger tea in hand. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly, staring at the city lights. "Regret what?" "Loving me." Her voice broke on the words. "Everything would have been easier if you hadn't." Miguel set his mug down and turned to her, his eyes unwavering. "Sandra, loving you is the only thing in my life I've never once regretted. Not then, not now, not ever." Her tears spilled freely, but this time they weren't from pain. They were from the dawning realization that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone in this fight after all. Chapter 12. The Battle for Tomorrow. The hospital room smelled faintly of antiseptic and rain from the storm outside. Sandra lay on the bed, frail and pale, her scarf slipping from her head to reveal thinning hair. The chemotherapy had been brutal this time, worse than before. Her body trembled with weakness, her lips cracked, her skin sallow. Miguel sat at her side, his hand firmly clasping hers as though his strength could pour into her veins. He hadn't slept in 2 nights, his eyes shadowed, his heart a raw wound of fear. Sandra stirred, her voice a whisper. "You shouldn't be here all the time. You'll burn yourself out." Miguel bent forward, pressing her hand to his lips. "I'm exactly where I need to be. Nothing else matters." Her tired eyes softened. "You've given so much already. To me, to JR. I don't want to leave you with only pain." He shook his head fiercely. "Don't you dare talk like that. You're not leaving us. Not now, not ever." His voice cracked as he lowered his forehead to hers. "I can't lose you, Sandra. I can't." Tears slipped down her cheeks, and she tried to smile. "Then pray for me, Miguel. Pray harder than you ever have." Outside the room, JR sat in the waiting area, swinging his legs nervously. He clutched the stuffed bear Miguel had bought him, whispering to it as though it could carry his words. "Please make Mama better. Please don't let her go." When Miguel came out to check on him, JR scrambled into his lap. "Papa, Mama's going to be okay, right?" Miguel's chest ached. He wrapped his arms around his son, holding him tightly. "Yes," he said, his voice steady, though his heart wavered. "She's going to be okay. Because she's strong. And because we love her too much to let her go." Weeks stretched into months. Sandra's battle was relentless. Cycles of sickness, moments of strength, days of despair. But through it all, Miguel never left her side. He cooked when she could not eat, carried her when she was too weak to walk, whispered love into her ears when she doubted herself. One night, when the pain was sharp and her tears wouldn't stop, Sandra broke. "Maybe God is telling me it's time. Maybe my fight is over. Miguel caught her face between his hands, his eyes boning with fierce devotion. "No, don't you dare say that. This is not the end, Sandra. This is just the hardest part of the journey. And I'll walk every step with you, no matter how long it takes." His voice cracked, but his resolve was unshakable. "I love you. I have always loved you. And I will love you for this, no matter what comes." Sandra wept in his arms, clinging to him as though he were the only anchor in her storm. And perhaps he was. By the end of that cycle, something shifted. Slowly, miraculously, the scans began to show improvement. The doctors were cautious, but hopeful. Miguel knelt by Sandra's bed, tears spilling down his cheeks as he pressed his forehead to her hand. "You're winning, my love. You're winning." And for the first time in months, Sandra allowed herself to believe it. Healing hearts. The day Sandra's doctor finally smiled was a day Miguel would never forget. He sat with her in the consultation room, his hand holding hers tightly, as the oncologist flipped through her latest scans. For a moment, the silence felt unbearable. Then came the words that made Sandra's chest tighten with disbelief. "The tumors are shrinking," the doctor said gently. "Your body is responding well to the treatment. We're seeing significant improvement." Sandra blinked, unable to process. "You mean it's working?" The doctor nodded. "Yes, you still have a long road ahead, but this is a very good sign. Keep fighting, Miss Reyes. You're winning this battle." Sandra turned to Miguel, her eyes wide, brimming with tears. He pulled her into his arms, his own voice breaking as he whispered, "You hear that? You're going to be okay. You're coming back to us." The weeks that followed were filled with cautious joy. Sandra's strength began to return slowly, her appetite improving, her laughter re-emerging in small, precious bursts. She was still weak, still fragile, but hope was alive again in their little family. One sunny afternoon, Miguel brought JR to the park, while Sandra, wrapped in a shawl, sat on a bench nearby. She watched as father and son chased each other across the grass, JR's laughter ringing out like music. Miguel let the boy tackle him, falling to the ground dramatically as JR declared himself the champion. Sandra's heart swelled at the sight. She pressed a hand to her chest, tears welling, not of sorrow, but of gratitude. This was what she had longed for, what she had prayed her son might one day have, a father's love, steady and true. Miguel returned to the bench, scooping JR into his arms. He sat beside Sandra, letting their son rest across both their laps. JR yawned. Already half asleep, his head nestled against Sandra's shoulder. Miguel brushed a strand of hair from her face. "You know, I used to think my greatest achievement was becoming president of the firm." Sandra smiled faintly. "And now?" He kissed her forehead, his eyes tender. "Now I know my greatest achievement is this. You, him, us." Her throat tightened, tears slipping down her cheeks. She leaned into him, her voice trembling. "I don't deserve you, Miguel. Not after everything." He cupped her face, forcing her to meet his gaze. "Don't you dare say that. You've always deserved love. Mine, his, the world's. You've carried so much alone, Sandra, but not anymore. Never again." That night, after JR was tucked into bed, Sandra and Miguel stood on the balcony together. The city stretched out before them, lights glittering like stars against the dark sky. Sandra leaned against the railing, her voice soft. "For the first time in years, I feel like I can breathe. Like tomorrow isn't something to fear anymore." Miguel slipped an arm around her waist, drawing her close. "Tomorrow is ours, mi amor. Every day from now on." Sandra rested her head against his shoulder, closing her eyes. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to dream of a future. One filled not with shadows and secrets, but with love, laughter, and healing hearts. Chapter 14. A Promise of Forever. It was a quiet Sunday morning when Miguel decided he could wait no longer. Sandra had just come back from a follow-up appointment, her steps lighter than they had been in months. The doctor had confirmed once more that her body was responding. that her recovery was real, and that her future looked brighter each day. She was radiant, even in her simple blouse and jeans, her scarf tied neatly around her head. To Miguel, she had never been more beautiful. That evening, after dinner, he asked her and JR to join him for a walk along the Davao seafront. The sun was setting, painting the sky in streaks of orange and pink, the sea glittering as the waves kissed the shore. Families strolled nearby, children laughing, lovers walking hand in hand. Sandra carried JR's small hand in hers, her smile gentle as she looked out at the horizon. Miguel walked beside them, his heart pounding with a nervousness he had not felt since his youth. They found a quiet spot on a bench overlooking the water. JR climbed down to collect seashells nearby, leaving Sandra and Miguel side by side. Miguel turned to her, taking her hand. She looked at him curiously, her eyes soft but questioning. "There's something I need to say," he began, his voice low, steady, but charged with emotion. "Sandra, I've made mistakes in my life. Mistakes that cost me years I can never get back. But if there's one truth that has never changed, it's this. I've always loved you. From the first moment, I've loved you." Sandra's lips trembled, tears filling her eyes. Miguel. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Opening it, he revealed a simple but elegant ring, white gold, a single diamond that caught the last rays of the sunset. Her breath caught. Miguel's voice broke as he continued. "I don't want to waste another day. I don't want to spend a single moment without knowing you're my wife, my partner, my forever. Sandra Reyes, will you marry me?" Sandra's tears spilled freely. She covered her mouth with her hand, her heart racing. For years, she had dreamed of him saying those words. And now, after all the heartbreak, the separation, the illness, the longing, here he was, offering her the promise she had once thought impossible. "Yes," she whispered, then stronger, her voice breaking with joy. "Yes, Miguel, I'll marry you." Miguel slipped the ring onto her trembling finger, his own eyes shining with tears. He pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that was both fierce and tender. Behind them, JR came running, seashells clutched in his small hands. "Mama, Papa, what's happening?" Sandra laughed through her tears, kneeling to hug him. "Papa just asked me to marry him." JR's eyes widened. "Really? That means we'll all be together forever?" Miguel crouched down, pulling his son into the embrace. "That's exactly what it means, son. Forever." The three of them clung to each other, the sea breeze wrapping around them, the sunset painting the sky with promises. And for the first time, none of them doubted that tomorrow was theirs. Chapter 15. The Wedding. The morning sun poured golden light over the small seaside chapel in Cebu. White flowers adorned the altar, delicate garlands draped along the pews, and the sound of soft music floated on the warm air. Friends, colleagues, and loved ones filled the space, their faces glowing with joy. Sandra stood in the anteroom, her reflection gazing back at her from a tall mirror. She wore a simple ivory gown, elegant, not extravagant, its flowing lines embracing her slender frame. A lace veil cascaded down her shoulders, and a small bouquet of white orchids trembled in her hands. She could hardly believe she was here. After all the years of longing, the heartbreak, the illness that had nearly stolen her future, today was hers. Today she was marrying the man she had loved in silence for so long. Nerlina, her former colleague and now bridesmaid, dabbed her eyes. "You look like an angel, Sandra. Miguel is going to lose his breath when he sees you." Sandra smiled softly, her heart racing. "He already has mine." At the front of the chapel, Miguel stood tall in a tailored suit, his dark eyes shining with anticipation. He had faced boardrooms, shareholders, even crises that shook entire companies. But nothing had ever made him feel as nervous as this moment. Then the music changed. The doors opened, and Sandra appeared, her veil catching the light, her smile radiant through tears. Miguel's chest tightened as though he'd been struck by the sight of her. For a heartbeat, the world ceased to exist. Only her walking toward him, every step a reminder of how far they had come. Beside her, JR held her hand proudly, dressed in a small suit that matched Miguel's. As he reached the altar, he looked up at his father with wide eyes. "Papa," he whispered loudly, "she's really coming to marry you." Laughter rippled through the guests, but Miguel's eyes blurred with tears. He bent down, kissed his son's forehead, and whispered, "Yes, son, forever." Sandra joined him at the altar, her hands slipping into his. Their vows were simple, spoken through trembling voices and hearts too full for anything but truth. "I promise to love you, Sandra, in strength and in weakness, in joy and in sorrow," Miguel said, his voice breaking. "You are my heart, my home, and my forever." Tears streamed down her cheeks as she replied, "And I promise to love you, Miguel, with everything I am. You are my greatest gift, my partner, my love for all my days." When the priest finally said, "You may now kiss the bride," Miguel pulled her into his arms, kissing her deeply, tenderly, as applause filled the chapel. JR clapped the loudest, shouting, "Yay! Mama and Papa are married!" The reception was filled with laughter and music, their colleagues reminiscing about old Friday nights, their friends raising glasses in toasts of joy. Amy's name was never mentioned. The past had no place here. Miguel and Sandra danced beneath the glow of lanterns, the sea shimmering in the distance. He held her close, his lips brushing her ear. "After everything, we found our way back." Sandra's tears sparkled as she whispered, "And this time, I'm never letting go." As JR spun in circles on the dance floor, his laughter carrying through the night, Sandra and Miguel shared a look that said everything words could not. They were home. Epilogue: Home at last. The morning light spilled gently across the veranda of their Cebu home. The sea breeze carried the scent of salt and blooming orchids, while laughter echoed through the garden where JR chased after a kite Miguel had bought him. Sandra leaned against the doorway, a cup of tea warming her hands. She was stronger now, her hair slowly growing back, her cheeks touched with the glow of health. Every day was a gift, every sunrise a blessing she never took for granted. Behind her, Miguel wrapped his arms around her waist, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You look beautiful," he murmured. Sandra smiled, resting her head against his chest. "You say that even when I've just woken up." "Especially then," he replied with a chuckle, his eyes never leaving her face. They stood together, watching JR laugh as his kite danced in the wind. The boy turned, waving. "Mama, Papa, look, it's flying so high." Miguel cupped his hands around his mouth. "So are you, son, higher and higher." Sandra's eyes filled with tears, though this time they were tears of joy. "I used to be so afraid," she whispered, "afraid of being alone, of losing everything. But now I'm not afraid anymore." Miguel tightened his hold on her, his voice tender but steady. "Because you're not alone, not ever again. We have forever, Sandra." She turned in his arms, kissing him softly, tasting the promise of the life they had built together. Hard-won, precious, and unbreakable. As the sun climbed higher, the three of them came together in the garden, their laughter rising above the waves. It wasn't just a family, it was love, tested, scarred, but stronger than anything time or fate had dared to throw against it. Sandra had found her home, not in the walls around her, but in the man who had never stopped loving her, and in the child they had created together. And this time she knew it was forever.